I'm Rachel. I'm a life coach and mentor with Creative Pathways Coaching. The link is in the description down below. And I offer the first session free for new clients. So there's a lot I want to cover in this video today, and if you haven't already, please subscribe down below, and while you're out there, like. It all helps to support my channel. So this week we're going to talk a little bit more about negging. You know, there's some debate about this so-called, flirting technique used in dating. So the debate really is whether it is a flirting technique or whether it's actually a manipulation tool to actually undermine the person that you're trying to get or score with. Some believe that it is undermining and insulting, and that what it does is it undermines the confidence of the person. And it can be a way to show that person, the pursued, that the pursuer doesn't, they're not that interested. So it's a way of a challenge, a form, of course, of manipulation. So Wikipedia reckons negging is. Negging is an act of emotional manipulation whereby a person makes a deliberate backhanded comment or otherwise flirtatious remark to another person to undermine their confidence and increase their need for the manipulator's approval. Negging is misunderstood as straightforward insult rather than a pickup line. You haven't explicitly rejected him or her, but at the same time, he or she will feel that you aren't even trying to impress them. This makes them curious as to why and makes you a challenge. On the other hand, Urban Dictionary defines negging as low-grade insults meant to undermine the self-confidence of a woman so that she might be more vulnerable to your advances. The term was coined originally from pickup artists, used to teach people how to pick up other people. Now, the reason I'm actually talking about negging today and why I've added on this video is, look, I've known about negging for quite a long time, and I haven't ever really defined it in my own life. I've seen it in other people, in friends and clients, but I've not actually felt that I had it in my own life or I was a victim of it in my own life. Until recently. I had been seeing a guy for a little while, and look, we had this little sort of tendency to what I would call take the piss out of each other. Now, for you non-Australian or English types, taking the piss is a term that we use. Anyway, taking the piss is basically mocking someone, particularly if they are a bit too full of themselves, or if maybe they're showing some vulnerability that we're not comfortable with. Now, just saying all this, it's just come to my attention that really taking the piss isn't the most healthy form of communicating or flirting. Urban Dictionary defines taking the piss as taking the piss is making fun of someone without hurtful intentions. So with this guy I was seeing, I liked the banter that was going on, but something happened and I started to question this. So I've had a lot of this banter in previous relationships, but I started to actually think about this a bit more and investigate into my own patterns in relationships, and started to notice that when I had that banter with a partner, there tended to be a lot of criticism in that relationship. And not just criticism that they had towards me, but also criticism that I had back towards them. So anyway, with this guy I was seeing, we were bantering, but there were a couple of times when he just went a bit too far. Now, of course, I sort of, in my way, told him to back off. And his response was that I was a little bit, touchy or a little bit sensitive about what he said. And that just sort of got me thinking about this. I realized I was being negged. And clearly, I was not comfortable with it. So I started to investigate the difference between taking the piss and negging, both being forms of a flirting technique, as we know, a little bit debatable, but looking at the differences between them, the different flirting techniques, as it were. Now, what I could see very clearly that taking the piss was a very obvious sign of mockery. So that's an obvious dig at someone. It's not hurtful, but it's mockery. So some people could take it as offensive, but it's not meant to be hurtful, as it were. And it's certainly an obvious mockery. Negging, on the other hand, although similar, is a backhanded compliment in that it starts with a compliment, but it ends up with a dig. So it ends up with some form of mockery. So what it tends to do, unlike taking the piss, negging tends to confuse the person that it's directed towards. But one of the things I noticed is how easy you can go from taking the piss out of someone to negging. And of course, in a situation I just told you, how easy it happened. So what I realized was taking the piss isn't as harmless as I thought before. And it's certainly maybe not as harmful as negging, but it's sort of in that basket a little bit. So negging reminds me of a form of interaction in the therapy back in the 70s, and I think it is the 70s, maybe I think it's the 70s, called Transactional Analysis. I know this because my mum had a couple of books on transactional analysis when I was a kid, and I was one of those kids that, you know, just used to read anything I could get my hands on. So I was quite familiar with this form of therapy. So a lot of this theory is based on the theory of strokes. Strokes are a unit of attention between individuals. So you can have positive strokes and you can have negative strokes. A positive stroke is a compliment. A negative stroke is some form of insult. Now that's a very basic type of the types of strokes, but there are more complex types of strokes. And one of them, and I can't remember actually the name of them, but it is a stroke where it starts off as a compliment, but there's a nasty tone to it. So it starts off with a compliment, but there's a dig underneath. So something like if someone were to say to you, "Hey, that's a great dress. It looks really good on you." It possibly would look better if you lost a kilo or two. So this sort of stroke is meant to confuse the person who's receiving the stroke. So what it does is it actually puts them on the back foot. They question the relationship that they have with that person, and that sort of stroke is a form of manipulation. So it undermines the other person. Now this sort of stroke is usually when someone actually then says, "Hey, that's not so nice." The other person is very likely to come back with, "Oh, that was not meant to be an insult. Did you take that as an insult? Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were that sensitive." Then you've got another little dig in there. But that's very common. And with that sort of stroke, the reaction when someone does actually stand up for themselves when receiving that sort of stroke will invariably get that sort of reaction. Now, does that remind you of something there? Negging? So as far as I see, negging is less about flirting and more the first sign of emotional abuse. So getting back to me and this investigation, it came to me and it made me realize that the bantering that I'd had with people that I'd had relationships with, those relationships tended to have more criticism in them and particularly more power struggles, which was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me. So, you know, it's a bit like, oh God, wow, that explains a few things. Hey. So for future reference, note to self, less of the banter and less of the taking the piss out of the other person. Perhaps maybe a little bit more intimacy. And clearly taking the piss is possibly not the most healthiest way to begin a relationship. And if it leads to possible negging and of course then a dynamic in the relationship that has a lot of criticism, power struggles, that's not healthy. So I will talk more about dynamics of relationships, whether it be healthy or unhealthy dynamics of relationships later on in the series. But I just wanted to touch on it now that, for example, this was a good example of the beginning of a relationship that could become unhealthy as a result. So an unhealthy dynamic that could have been created. So if this sounds familiar to you, maybe it might be an idea to have a little bit of an investigation, as I did, with regards to your interactions with other potential partners and relationships, including previous relationships. So in previous relationships, have you been criticized, or did you criticize? Or particularly, were you made to feel that you were overreacting or too sensitive? If that's the case, maybe you were being negged in your relationship, even as we spoke about before, taking the piss, even forms of mockery. Having a look and seeing that in previous relationships, whether those things were involved in the relationship. So if it's happening to you now at the moment in the relationship you're in, or the person you're dating at the moment, it might be an idea to have a conversation with them. What negging is, the implications of negging in the here and now, in the present, but as well also implications of negging in the future, looking at unhealthy dynamics to the relationship and where that can lead. So criticism, power struggles and whatnot. And if they don't react very well to this, you might need to rethink the relationship. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe down below to see future content. I do a video every week, every Wednesday. So if you've got any comments or feedback with regards to what I spoke about today, or if you've got any suggestions for any future videos, please put them in the comments below. And remember, you can book a coaching session with me at my website, or you can email me. Catch you next week.